Good evening, everybody. Just by way of introductions, my name is Crispin, and I'll be the host for this evening's Leaders in Conversation. And it happens to be the final one of the year. And Rory, I can't think of a better topic and a better guest to do the final Leaders in Conversation for 2023. So, folks, I just really would like to introduce you to Rory. And Rory, if you can just say hi to everybody and introduce yourself, please, and then we'll get into the topic and get the ball rolling.
Well, thank you, Crispin. Thanks, Boundless Leadership and Boundless Wisdom, and Jeanette and the team in the background. I really appreciate the opportunity to, as you indicated, wrap up the year, but we're not quite there yet.
It feels like you're caught between wanting to wrap up and realizing there's about another 8 weeks to go. Rory, let's dive into it, folks. Thank you for joining us this evening. Rory and I started kicking the ball around in terms of this topic before we had 3 close games at the World Cup and eventually won. And at that stage, Rory, we were talking about where the country is and where the world is at that stage in terms of just really feeling overwhelmed and feeling under the cosh. And as you and I were talking, feeling kind of a lot of under the surface stuff leaders are dealing with. And almost a loss of hope and a loss of direction. And hence we themed this evening's conversation around that is how leaders can actually be agents of change or stewards of change, how leaders can enable learning and ongoing learning and growth, and how leaders can be stewards of hope. Maybe the point of departure, Rory, is to ask you in terms of just where you move, the circles you work in, the clients you engage with locally and abroad. What's your experience of where leaders are and where they're finding themselves at this point?
Thanks, Crispin. I think let me start because change starts with me. So let me ground it in where I'm at the moment. And this is a topic close to my heart. So I define myself as a hoper. Napoleon Bonaparte actually said leaders are dealers in hope. So leaders lead, dealers deal. I guess hopers have to hope. So for me, it was something I discovered during lockdown. And the first key thing that I realized, and it's probably more pertinent now, sort of 3 years later, is it's a choice. And it's an intentional, deliberate choice. You actually have to choose to be hopeful, because the sense that I'm getting is that when you look around, the stimulus around us is negative. And our default as human beings is we kind of gravitate towards the headline negativity. And my real kind of challenge is how do we help people in the midst of their circumstances actually see that they have this power, that they have this choice, that they have that decision in how they choose to show up. So Viktor Frankl, years ago in the Second World War, he wrote that Man's Search for Meaning, and he says the stimulus and response is a space, and that's, so we've got this idea of there's a response to a catalyst or a stimulus, and that's really where all of us are feeling. We kind of, some of us are actually creating and others of us are waiting. And he says in that space, we have a choice to choose our response. And in that response, we can choose freedom and growth. So it really is something that I'm picking up more and more in the reading that I'm doing, is finding people that are positively optimistic, hopeful towards better next. And for me, there's a lot of people kind of poo-poo, they say, hope is just a wish, it's a dream, and then you look at something like you just said with the Springboks. We were hopeful for a victory. And my God, they dragged it out. So we literally had to wait for 1 point and 1 point and 1 point. But behind that, there was intention. There was a pathway. There was deliberate activities and choices. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen, for example, where there was a mark in the 25, they call for a scrum. It's just not been done before. So part, I think, what the leaders need to be doing is, in the midst of their circumstances, what actually is in your control, and in that space, what are you doing with it? So there's a pathway in terms of how do you navigate when you get obstacles and you have challenges. The other part is your belief in your agency, that you have the capability to actually deliver what needs to be done to accomplish your goals. So hope has got three parts to it. It's setting goals and having an objective that you're working towards. It's having that confidence in that and in your capability and your agency that you can deliver it. And in spite of obstacles, finding a way around it. And possibly let's leave that for a start, because I know you wanted to ask me something else.
Yes, please. But before I do that, folks, please make use of the chat box. If you're wanting to post a question or a comment or a statement, use that. If you want to come into the conversation at any point, please just unmute yourself and interrupt us, and we'll work with your inputs as well. Rory, I just want to circle back to two things you said, please. You mentioned creating versus waiting. Go back there, please. What is that practically? What does creating look like in a leadership context? And what does waiting look like? And how do we see that, and how do we work with those two sources of energy, if you want?
I think that's a really accurate way of summarizing it. It's about energy, because life is happening and things are going on around us. Let's just rewind a little bit back to our COVID days, because I think it's probably something that most of us can relate to. You know, a major decision was taken globally, and I think 2/3 of the world went into some sort of shelter in place, lockdown, or some kind of, you know, almost safety precautions, and the world changed. You know, we used to drive or transition to work and then transition home. So you had a very clear differentiation between these worlds of who we are. COVID, I think, is completely just grayed that. You know, so I remember there was that concept that people were saying they were working from home. In our family, it was actually we were living at work. It's a subtle difference, but it's quite profound. So, for example, where you wait for things to happen, you know, you got a meeting and you need to get to that meeting. Suddenly, the meeting is using technology. Suddenly, that meeting is you know, using new ways of engagement. How do you mute yourself and unmute? And I mean, we're still seeing people struggling with even years later. But we've become completely, almost comfortably numb with the new ways of working. And part of, I think, that challenge was that we weren't given an option. You literally were forced, in terms of, in spite of the circumstances, and none of us knew what was happening. We didn't know how long this thing was going to last. We didn't know how long the lockdowns were going to be. We didn't know whether a vaccine was happening or not happening. And for me, what I realized is that I choose what I listen to. I choose what information I'm going to filter, what's in my control. If I just absorbed everything that was out there, I would have been completely overwhelmed. And I did. I think many of us extroverty kind of people, when you were put into that space, and my energy is, as I engage with people, I get energy back. And suddenly that wasn't available anymore. What do you do, and how do you cope? You can sit there and say, poor me, I'm the victim. Or you make a different opportunity out of that. And I think that's really where I want our conversation to kind of progress. And I think you've captured it nicely around that the sense of energy. Are we waiting for that energy to open up, or are we actually stepping into, and as we step into, so it opens as we go? and that we embrace and lean into, and get involved. And as you get involved, guess what? The worst that can happen is you may have done it just too quick or too soon, or you can always reverse a little. So the idea of failing fast, I think, has become a lot more currency in terms of people taking that responsive action. Remember, between the stimulus and the response is that space, and in that space we have choice. So my sense is that there's a great concept of 90 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So between that stimulus and the response, that 90 seconds is, what are you going to do with it? If you react impulsively, you then have to live with the consequences of that. And you have that choice of actually using that 90 seconds, apply your mind, take a sense of control. And then you get two very different outcomes in terms of one is a response and one is a reaction.
Rory, are you just give me a real practical example of that? Because I come across a lot of people who, you mentioned it earlier, default to, I don't have choice. I'm in this system. My organization expects me. And I want to come back to the word we introduced just now, and that is that disempowerment a form of trauma? And how do we link what we're reading a lot of these days about people disengaging, hard quitting, quiet quitting, etc., 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 just really just disconnecting? Is that a form of choice, or are they victims of a system?
I see Paul's got a comment there around the 90-second window. Maybe let's see, and then I can build on that.
Paul?
Hey, hello both. Hey Rory. Hello, lovely to connect with you. I wrote that and then I thought, oh my goodness, I haven't actually got thoughts. I've got a feeling around it. I need to find some thoughts to articulate. So maybe you'll help me. Maybe you'll help me as I go. I mean, ultimately, I could not agree more with what you're saying, and quite timely. I'm just finishing off the Viktor Frankl piece again, so that's quite serendipitous. I do a lot of work with leaders and teams and non-leaders actually in the trauma space. And this moment that you're articulating of, well, I mean, you know, you use the word space. Space in itself is quite spacious, right? There's space within space, and those are your 90 seconds to say, "Oh, look at how I'm being. What's going on? What am I choosing here?" And I also write a lot, quite viscerally, about everything that gets in the way of doing that, where you are just so gripped and in the pull of adrenaline or fear or whatever it is, that there isn't space. There's just constriction, and you're just dragged down into something a bit more primal, and you just go for it. And then at some stage later in the pub or wherever it is, you think, oh my gosh, what did I do? And it's that and he speaks from experience when he says this as well. And you know, and I was just thinking, oh, how does that link with hope? And I think there is, what can you have in your life that creates the space in those moments where you don't feel like you're at the mercy of, well, if we keep it very organizational, pace and drive and competitors and everything else that grips you? What else can you have about yourself that in those moments is the thing that gives you that space in those 90 seconds rather than,
Beautiful.
I can't breathe. So there's a thought in there somewhere, but yeah.
Well, there's that intuitive, almost instinctive response, and I guess as human beings, you know, if you look at it from a neurobiological or physiological point of view, we have our immediate response, which is usually fear-based. It's kind of like fight, flight, freeze, and maybe even fawn. So you literally are reacting, responding, your cortisol runs, your adrenaline gets going, and you are reacting. The alternative is where you are saying, what's the reward piece? And remember, from a change logic point of view, people will resist change because, in fact, they're fearing the loss. They don't really willingly embrace it because of the reward piece. And that's why I say there's this sort of nuanced approach. And the 90-second is almost in that moment, in that space where you have that choice. What about choosing, instead of us going and defaulting to the typical thing of, if you call it compliance, risk-driven, risk-averse, fear-based, a runaway kind of logic, okay? Which is, as I say, it's our natural default. What if we ask the question, what can go right? What if we are moving towards a reward circuitry? What if we are actually embracing and pulling ourselves towards hope? And it was something I learned in a project that I was running with one of the banks. And in the middle of everything, it was an incredibly regulatory driven project. It was a lot of risk. You're dealing with financial services, you're dealing with people's money and livelihoods and systems and all the rest of it. And I think when we shifted the project towards what is the proactive risk opportunity in terms of how we can actually enhance our reputation, as opposed to almost sitting there and saying, well, what are we going to be as determined by, for example, a regulator? What is the choice that we are making in terms of how we choose to show up, how we want to engage our customers, and therefore what is the appropriate level of technology and so on. So to all intents and purposes, what was a 90% technology project actually took a new flavor and nuance, because it is then becoming more around of, well, if we're going to be a reputationally enhancing new opportunity, therefore, what is the appropriate technology? So instead of just replace like for like technology, you have a different conversation. It's a different way of engaging. And I think oftentimes what we saw, I know, Crispin, when we were preparing for this, we talked around our environments that are, we call them the VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, confused, and complex and ambiguous, and then the variations on that. And essentially what we're seeing is that change is just getting faster and more, all at the same time. So the long lead times that we had to kind of plan things, and we learned that the hard way in COVID. If you kind of looked at what was your long-term projection was when lockdown opens. That was a long-term projection, because industries had actually shut down, and the eventing industry, the tourism, they just stopped completely, and it was out of their control. And yet in that time, you have incredible stories of how some people completely turned and changed what they were doing under the circumstances for good, and other people chose not to. And why is that? Why do we have the amazing stories of Merwe, the whiteboard team? Their mindset was literally, they were sitting, waiting and testing and experimenting and enhancing and playing and adapting all the time. And then suddenly we all had to learn what is Zoom and what is MS Teams and Google Classrooms and all the other different platforms. And then we realized, well, we need to actually have a way of engaging people, because we still need to, and Merwe actually had that. And they anticipated it and they were ready for it.
I just want to hook something Paul said. Siyanda, you had a comment there that Paul's question resonates with you. Do you want to just come in at this point? Siyanda? Right. Rory, I just want to hook back to Paul's point around the space and the 90 seconds. You're bringing something to that says, hang on, but there's a proactiveness. There's an anticipation of something. It doesn't happen when I'm in that reality and now it's the 90 seconds and the space. This is what I'm trying to say makes sense, is how do we then build the muscle to actually anticipate that this is a reality that may change or something may be happening, or my reality will be significantly different in 6 months or a year from now, and not wait for that.
So I don't know if I'm going to answer your question directly, because it is a complex, and we do need to have time to kind of sit and really chew our way through some of it. What I'm really positioning is this idea of proactively grabbing hope, because it's a purposeful, different way of getting. So it's what can go right. So it's an intentional, deliberate, purposeful cause, and I'm moving towards that. But the only way you can get there, and this is the crazy thing, you know that hope is free? It's a mindset. It's an intentional, deliberate choice. But it's also something that I've only realized more recently, in conversations with somebody like Catherine Goodsco, that hope is actually teachable. So she's now, as a global representative of the United Nations Mental Health, she's created a curriculum on extensive research, and has a phenomenal program that is now going into schools. She runs Hopeful Minds, Hopeful Cities. And what I found absolutely amazing is that her choice for hope initially started off in terms of what's going wrong. And what was going wrong was lots of hopelessness. And lots of hopelessness is actually one of the single biggest triggers for people to give up. And when they are hopeless, and then even worse, they become helpless, and they're sitting in that trapped environment, their response is not a considered response. It's not that 90-second, let me think my way through this. It's almost that reactive response, which is, this is overwhelming. It's out of my control. There's nothing worth staying around. And we saw, and we anticipated in the lockdown, we anticipated a phenomenal increase in mental health issues.
Yeah, and we're
one
seeing
of them
that.
being suicide. So increased depression, despair, anxiety, stress, trauma. And remembering that trauma is come to the explanation of it. Trauma is an event, but it's not the event in and of itself. It's the what happens inside of us because of that event. Because there were people that responded and have done incredibly well, and in fact are better through and because of that trauma that have been experienced. Another person, under the same circumstances, just doesn't cope like that. Their response is they default to that hopeless, helpless. And they get stuck, and then they are overwhelmed. And in that overwhelm, they make other choices. And that's why I say, for me, it's that wait or create.
So just rewind. So as you're explaining that reality, or just sharing that picture, I was seeing this picture in my mind, and I'm hearing you saying two things. You said hope is free, hope is teachable. Just unpack that a bit, please. What does that really mean practically? The free part, I think I get, but the teachable part, just unpack that for us a bit, please.
So not only is it teachable, because it's how do you hope? So how do we work with, and I call it the rule of 1/3. If you take the typical response of people in a let's use the ETOLs, fairly controversial kind of environment, okay? You'll find there are some people that will pay because it's the right thing to do, and because it's the principle of the road users and so on. But there are a whole host of people that said that's already being paid for by other mechanisms, the road fuel levies, etc., etc. And then there were a whole bunch of people that sort of sat in the middle, and they waited to see, is there benefit to joining the rebel group in terms of the resistors? And if there's no punishment, guess where that group in the middle is going to go? They're going to skew to that side over there, which is the path of least resistance. Unless and until they get invited, because there's incentives and reward, and there's a real sense of, why are we doing this? a greater sense of purpose, for example, or an understanding of what the power of collaboration is for the greater good. If there's that, then they will move towards that side. But either way, you've got what I call your willing able and your hopeless helpless, if I can put it like that. So I kind of think, if you're looking at the robot concept, you've got your red group over here and your green group over there and your yellow group in the middle. And as I say, I call it the rule of 1/3, because the challenge here is that you've got people at both extremes. But you've got a massive chunk, if you think about a typical, a curve, you've got a massive chunk of folks sitting in the middle. And they almost are watching and waiting.
Mm-hmm.
They can and will go that fear route, and they will push to red, because there's no consequence to it, and it's the path of least resistance. But what if, instead of having, technically, if you are in charge of it, instead of having a 2/3 problem, what can you do to incentivize, motivate, engage, and invite them to become 2/3 of a problem solution? So it's almost like a problem-solving mindset versus a problem-creating, and we spend a lot of time identifying our problem and talking about the problem, but we don't actually kind of get to solving the problem. And I think that's really one of the differences there, is the hope mindset, by definition, actually sees what can be and what might yet be. So it looks at what is that reality right now, and how can it improve, increase, expand, extend, and everything about it is, in one sense, it's almost like life affirming. It's engaging, and it's kind of action in the present tense. My sense is that the other group is kind of, they've given up. They're sitting there watching. They are sitting there and they are moaning and they are bemoaning their fate, but they're not changing their circumstance. They're not or disempowered to actually challenge their own set of reality. And I actually got into that space during lockdown. I was in that red zone. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, I was in a very supportive environment, and I recognized it in myself. I think a lot of us have that potential to spiral, and I recognized it. Thank God my wife was also able to say, you know what, actually, this is not healthy. So I had people that were caring of me and actually pointed things out, even if I wasn't seeing it. And it was at that point that I had a choice to make, between the stimulus and the response. I can sit and I can just wallow. In fact, Adam Grant coined the term languishing. He almost reactivated that term. So that yellow group in the middle, they are languishing. They're joyless. They kind of wake up, drink coffee, get on the treadmill, drink a glass of wine, get back into bed, wake up, get on the treadmill. They're joyless and they're doing what they need to do. They're not quite in that kind of like helpless, hopeless, but they also aren't in this flourishing, thriving, and I think most of us, by definition, we want to be in that space, but oftentimes we don't know how to. So that's the teachable part of where hope comes from. The other thing about hope is that it's measurable. So you can actually take a baseline now and say, how hopeful am I? And then you can say, how hopeful do I want to be? And what are those things that I'm going to learn? And the younger we can teach that to our kids. And that's one of the things that Catherine's research has specifically shown, is that with young girls, because our highest suicide rate is among young teenage girls. And what was that? Because they have the highest levels of helpless, hopeless. Now, we always think suicide, we think it's a male thing, and we think it's, violent and so on. But from the get-go, we've been anticipating this tsunami of mental ill health. And yes, there has been this measurement and this tracking, and we have seen people becoming more overwhelmed and getting caught into that space. But we've also seen a new thing in terms of teaching hope and making it freely available and extending it out as it can go through as community programs, it can go as education programs. It doesn't have to stay in the old mindset of, it has to be part of the maths curriculum or part of this. It's a life skill. And more and more, I'm seeing that as something that 90-second window. How do we embrace and lean towards and engage and invite that mindset of what can be, what might yet be, what can go right.
So can I get some free consulting from you?
Go ahead.
I'm just creating a scenario. So I'm leading a team, and I can recognize in my team the greens, the oranges, and the reds. That they're all there. I, as the leader, may potentially at times be in the green or the orange and the red myself, and my colleagues that are my peers may be there as well. What advice do you have, Rory? How do we practically deal with that reality that we have the third in our teams, in our organizations? Yet we are under this cosh, as almost as Paul was saying, that we have to deliver. The pressure's there. Everything is just piling up. To your point of speed, it's just happening faster and faster, and all at the same time. So I'm asking a double-barreled question. I recognize parts of green, orange, red in myself, but I can also see that in my team. Where to? How do I engage with that? And if it's a teachable mindset ability, how do I do that? Where do I start?
It's a hugely involved question, Christmas. So let me try. For me, there were three key things that changed and have changed if you look back. Work itself, the concept of work has changed. How we work, what we do, the tools that we use. So the construct of work has changed. And in that we've also, so that hasn't invited us to play with. We've just been kind of dragged along, kicking and screaming. I was on a call the other day, and you had to remind somebody you're on mute still, and you kind of, guys, we all should know that by now, and yet life is still happening, so the work has changed. Where we work, if you think back to where we were, I said we were living at home or working at
living at
you
work.
used to have that work at home, and then you're now living at work. And you have that concept of that space or that place of doing work. So what you were doing has changed. Where you do it has changed. And then you've got the third component to what I call the W's, and that's me, the worker. I've changed. So when you take all three of those component pieces and you look at it and say, all of that has changed. Some by design is actually a good thing. Some, the power balances has shifted. Look at what's happening with, return to work, go back to the office, go back to normal. We can't go back to normal. Normal is gone. The water, that principle that Desmond Tutu says, we're busy picking people up way downstream over here, and we're picking that person up and pick the next one up. And the next. We actually need to go upstream and actually stop the people falling in the beginning, because life has changed. And yes, you're right. We can flex and become different parts of that, a bit like a chameleon. And sometimes that can happen multiple times. You can find that I'm resisting the way that the work is happening, but I'm actually great as a worker. I'm in the green space as a worker, but I'm in the red space in my work. And then I can't get this technology right. I'm still struggling with it. I'm in the yellow zone so we can be all over the place. And that's why I say, for me, hope is, it's a choice. And by having a choice, you set yourself a target, an end game, a goal, a deliverable. And you start saying, well, what should I or can I achieve by this point? And so you start breaking it down into kind of bite-sized, chunkable, doable pieces. Because remembering, as human beings, we are motivated with what's working. So success breeds more success. So if we set it up in a way that actually that's habits. They say it takes 21 days to change a habit. Well, that's day one, then it's day two, then it's day three. It's not like start with 21 days and it's a long way away. Start with day one. Day one then goes into day two. Day two goes into day three. When you look at it across the spectrum, you've actually made a huge shift. And that's a principle that I think Benjamin Hardy wrote an amazing book called The Gap in the Game. And he wrote it in collaboration with one of the coaches, not Dan Sullivan, one of the other guys. And the principle is, we often look, when we set goals, we look to the gap. We look to what is still yet to be done. And oftentimes that can be quite overwhelming because it's always far away. You know, it's that principle when you're hiking, you know, it's like round the corner, but round the corner, there's 2 more corners before around the corner again. You know, and you've got this principle of, but when you look back, and some of us, I think, we gap people. We keep driving ourselves really hard in terms of, I'm not there yet. And because I'm not there yet, I haven't accomplished it. But we don't stop and actually give credit. I am further than I was yesterday. I might not be where I want to be yet, but I'm making progress towards it. So there's this concept of gap and gain. And I think when we're setting our milestones and targets, and as leaders, we need to be mindful that we need to be helping people, not with the overwhelm in terms of how far, how big, how incredibly difficult this is going to be. And change is tough, hard, incredibly difficult. But think about this, the research coming out 2008, in that time around when we had our previous big world trauma, if I can say it like that, the financial meltdown. Around that time, Gallup published research and said, what do followers need and want from their leaders? And there's 4 things. The first thing is they want their leaders to care and have compassion for them as a person. And guess what happened in COVID? People first. Employers were literally making sure, are you okay? They were checking in with people. They were, how are you? And suddenly we were like mindful of, you've got a family, you've got 3 generations in the same space. How are you managing with whatever that, and you know, pets were coming onto screen and life was happening. And suddenly we were getting this massive, so care and compassion. And I think we saw, and most businesses responded reasonably well with that. The second one up is, as a leader, you're a dealer in hope. Part of giving and being and leading hope is you've got to be able to give that sense of, it's not certainty per se, because we can't be certain about the uncertainties, but we can be communicating what is stable, what is not changing, what will change, but even when that changes, this is how we're going to manage it. So there's that sense of stability in the way that I've unpacked it like that. And then the third one is around trust. And trust has kind of 2 pieces. There's the trust. I'm trusting you as my workplace to do what you need to do. You must bring your side. I was going to say something different according to the World Cup, but I better not. Remember that. Thank you, Crispin. So I'm bringing my side using the English translation. And trustworthiness, because the leader has to be worthy of that trust by those followers. But the leader's also got to give trust as well as be trustworthy. And that comes down to the 4th one, which is hope. And the leader has got to role model that hope. The leader is set up for and with and by the followers because the leader has that role. And that's what Napoleon's quote in terms of leaders are dealers in hope is so powerful. Because it's about taking this, call it this continuum of where we are, from, should we call it our red zone folks to the yellow zone folks to the green folks, our flourishing, thriving group over here, what I call the willing ables. And they're a pleasure to work with. And what typically happens, Crispin, is that we load those people with more. You know, they often say, give a busy man, they'll get the job done. Well, we've also started seeing something new. And that's giving that extra work to those busy people. We are seeing those very people now, the healers, the helpers, the heroes, we're seeing them burning out, particularly in the medical sphere. We are seeing it showing up. For example, I was on a webinar with the Medical Association last week. And take a guess where the highest rate of bullying and workplace harassment is happening in terms of a profession or an industry or a sector. Take a guess.
You just mentioned was it in the health sector then, or in the medical?
It's actually in the health sector.
Based on,
and those are the very people that are keeping us healthy. But there's systems. So you've got individuals and you've got systems. And burnout, in terms of trauma, burnout is actually, we often label it as you must get better. You know, here's some medicine, put it in a cup and wind it up in an instant cure. But how did that person become burnt out? You think about compassion fatigue. Think about and leaders, and I'm talking a leader is not only a title to a person on top of that team. You are a leader in multiple roles. You know, you might be the football coach in your community. You can be the owner of a shop. You could be a teacher in the school. You've got these multiple roles, and you are leading in different roles at different times. And oftentimes I think we get stuck into this thing of, we're only a leader in the workplace. Well, Napoleon didn't say leaders in the workplace are dealers in hope. It's this principle of leaders, and we all lead at different points and at different times. So the challenge is actually, how do we now talk to that red group? Because they leaders as well. So how do we actually call out that leadership of those environments? Because please God, they're not only red at work. Or maybe if they are leaders, they can't just be red all the time. They're overwhelmed with helpless and hopeless. We need to be finding where are their opportunities in their roles, in their life, in their other opportunities that they are being recognized, being called out, that are giving that care and compassion, that are demonstrating that sense of stability and certainty, that are trustworthy, and being and giving hope, because these are all two-way issues. And I think oftentimes we kind of almost get into a workplace and we think you only this portion of.
And it's important that you're stressing that this isn't just work related, although we spend most of our time there. Rory, there's a question or a comment in the chat from Siyanga. I'm not sure if you saw it. It says, is there a time to leave people where they are? As a dealer in hope, at what stage, back to this point really around where the energy is there a point that we actually have to move on and leave people behind?
So that's an incredibly rich question for me. I deliberately have chosen to get involved with working in the change environment, but not just as a typical kind of, change, model this or model that, but how do we help people get through change? It's not a recipe. It's not like you can apply this model and it'll work every single time, because when you show up, there's nuances, there's flavors, there's intricacies, there's variations. So yes, you can apply it. Oftentimes you can use some of the kind of, should we call it, the broad recipes. But the idea, I think, of us saying that there's this one size fits all and it'll work every time, always, I think those days have long gone. So what I'm looking for is, where are those opportunities that we are deliberately and intentionally looking to see, how can we not leave people behind? What is it that, because if we carry on doing what we've always done, we're going to carry on getting what we've always got. And South Africa is a case in point. We have the single highest Gini coefficient of inequality in the world. I mean, we are, in a lot of ways, Crispin, we are leaders in the world. Let me give you a different example. Maybe this might answer your question. We are world leaders in our South African police service of family murders and suicide by the police member using their police weapon to take out and not cope.
Sure.
I cannot say that's okay. So Sianda, you're sometimes, but I can't. I'm too invested. But in order for me to actually, and I have done some work with the police, and they've got some phenomenal, incredible programs with amazing people. But here's the kicker, is that, like with mental health issues, it's a stigma. So if somebody then reaches out and says, I'm not coping, I'm It's not this logic that we learned during COVID, which is okay to not be okay. They are literally labeled, they are stigmatized, and there's a fear that that's now going to jeopardize their opportunity for career progression. And so in our way of in our often broken ways of dealing with that, and our ways of coping are not healthy. But we've got phenomenally well-intentioned, well-resourced, amazing employee assistance programs, trauma counselings, chaplain services in the police service, run by highly competent, well-trained, incredible people. But the system, we're trying to fix individuals, but we're not necessarily fixing. Why are those people so traumatized? Are we debriefing them when they go out to a crime scene? Are we debriefing them and giving them that support? For example, a stupid question that came up more recently is should our police officers be taking their service weapon home when they're off duty? It's a question. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily the answer. I'm just saying it's one of the considerations, because, Sianda, if we leave people just to stay where they are, we're going to have a worse world-class first record here of our family murders and suicides. What the system is telling us is that our coping mechanism is not working. So between the stimulus and the response, and we've got incredibly well-intentioned, well-resourced, highly skilled solutions that are available, but people choose not to.
Wow. Yeah, Sianda, thank you. That opened up a whole new train of thought for me as well, and your response to that, Rory. As you can hear, I'm really just processing that now. Daneo, you had your hand up. Do you want to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, and good evening, everyone.
Hello, Daneo.
Rather interesting conversation, and really appreciating it. And I'm not sure, maybe I might be a little bit off track, but I just need some guidance in my thinking, I think. What happens then? Because what I was sitting here and thinking was, okay, how do you, as a leader, yes, we're trying to move people from where they are into a certain direction, especially when it comes to issues of having to, influence them to be more hopeful and. But now, what if the culture of the organization is is actually the cause for the people to be hopeless? You understand? What if people have gotten, the culture has been so embedded that silent quitting is basically taking over within the organization. And because for me, and that's maybe what I can't seem to make sense of, to say that, okay, yes, I'm the type of person as well. I wouldn't want to leave anybody where they are. But where do you, or how do you balance it? How do you navigate through a culture that actually actually draws people into that mode of negativity or silent quitting or whatever you want? How do you navigate through that?
Lovely question, and it's a real question. It's a real reality, Rory, that many of the leaders I work with are asking very much the same question differently, but very much the same question. Thanks, Daneo. It's a really, really powerful question. Rory?
Yeah, thank you, Daneo. In terms of, and I don't believe I'll give it justice now. I really want to mull my way through that and chew on it. But you're talking around a culture. Culture is how we do things around here. It's not the set of values that are up on the board and the kind of oftentimes the traps we fall into and then we think we've done a good job. It's really the how we do stuff. And I kind of alluded to that just now in terms of the system. So we've got individuals in a system. And at the end of the day, what I'm realizing more and more is that we are part of the system, and we influence the system as much as the system influences us. And if you address the individual who is traumatized, you're only solving a portion of the problem. So let me try and explain it like this. Take our Zondo Commission into state capture. And what Zondo Commission, in summary, one of the things that he found, for example, is that we have, in many instances in the state-owned entities and in the environments that he investigated, the SAAs, SARS, Eskom, Transnet, Denel, and so on, in many of those instances, the underpinning issue was bullying became the tolerated and way of doing things, to the extent that, for example, an entire treasury team was marginalized, and literally an alternative entity was paid this, a massive amount of money to come and problem solve exactly what they were supposed to do, but they were completely marginalized. And as much as they protested and all the rest, so what you've got is that the system done badly in terms of leaders leading with the wrong intentions and motives and things like that, you can actually get a result that is not what we would want to see, but it is the reality. So now you've got all these people that are in these enterprises. Take SAA, for example, the few that are left, because SAA, from literally being a global world-class carrier over a period of time, and now it's a shadow of what it used to be. What about the people in SAA? Because I could say that those folks, they were doing their jobs, they were showing up, they were wearing their uniforms, but there was stuff happening around them, and suddenly they literally were in liquidation. Now, as an individual, how do they cope? How does the team cope? And how does the industry or the organization cope? And what we're seeing, there's words like compassion fatigue, burnout, your stress and anxiety levels, people checking out, as we've already mentioned, the kind of the high stress levels and the suicide and not wanting to leave people behind. In that culture, how do we actually show up differently for what used to be a good thing, which is now in this state of transition or overwhelm or intentional redirection, if I can say it like that? That's incredible trauma. And it's not for the individuals in there to be the sole solutions. That is a systemic issue. We're still waiting to see what is the outcome of the legal processes, the holding people accountable. We've seen some small, very small kind of righteous legal protocols going through. But for the most part, nothing has changed. So we remain traumatized. So Zian, to come back to your point, I don't think we must leave people where they are, but we also need to be shifting with some degree of speed to actually see something different. And that's why when you have the rugby team and they say that we have this challenge back home in South Africa, we are overwhelmed. We don't need to read anymore. Zondo has unpacked it for us. He's told us what our problems are. And one of those problems is harassment and bullying by leaders that are leading badly, deliberately, intentionally badly. And we tolerate it and we allow it.
Rory, we've got 5 minutes left. Take us with what you've just said, and thank you for those who've commented in the chat box and asked those really, really profound questions. And Paul, your point around it, hope is an existential. It's yeah, and then not everybody necessarily is able to deal with that. Rory, just paint a picture. If we look into the future, and if I had to sum this evening up, what stands out for me is that it comes down to me as an individual and where I find myself, and me as the leader in my circle of influence, and what I can influence into. I'll be with you in a second, Kim. Where to from here? If we want to heal, if we want to restore, if we want to bring healing into these systems, whether they're organizational or faith-based or families or wherever, where do we start, and how do we then become, as parents, as fathers, as grandparents, as leaders, these dealers of hope? But before you respond, I'd like to hear Kim's input. Kim?
Thanks, Crispin. I think, sorry, just in response, I've been reflecting on Danae's question, and then it actually, I resonated with what you were saying about being a leader of influence. And I was just thinking about the statistics that we all know. People do not leave companies, they leave managers, right? They leave the people that they directly report to because of that environment. And in exactly the same way, we can influence one person at a time by being the manager they choose to stay with, by providing hope, by individualizing our management style in a way that allows us to give those individuals an opportunity to feel appreciated and valued, to understand their contribution. And I guess I'm just thinking that as hopeless as it sometimes feels in a work environment, many people would probably reflect to say, if it wasn't for that manager, I would not, or that leader, I would not have been here still. I would have done this. And the loyalty that breeds, the discretionary effort that breeds, the sense of then paying that forward for people around, having learnt by example from a leader who has done it for us, I think is critical to remember, in spite of a culture that might almost encourage everyone not to be the difference that we need in that environment.
Lovely. Thank you. Yeah, that's actually quite a powerful summary of the whole evening. Thank you, Kim. Really appreciate that. Rory, last words from you,
maybe
please.
Let me just try and wrap it up a little bit. And I've deliberately left this to last. But all of you have heard of, from what I've described and what Kim talked there specifically around, what we refer to as post-traumatic stress disorder, high levels of stress, anxiety, depression, the red zone stuff. And we all know that. So how many of you know about post-traumatic growth? And I see you on the call. I look at somebody like Anne, and I've been watching Anne fight cancer. And if you don't mind, Anne, can I quickly use part of that as an example?
With absolute pleasure, Rory.
Thank you. So the first thing around post-traumatic growth, the research came in the late 90s, and it talks to, in the midst of trauma, again, we have that space where we can make those choices and so on. And what they found is that people who are what they call post-traumatic growth, they look back at that event and that circumstance, which was horrible at the time, and they say, I'm grateful and I appreciate that happened to me, for me. So it's no longer just like a victim, I'm waiting for it to happen. It's actually, it happened for me because it's made me more. It's made me better. It's made me different. We don't necessarily choose it, but our attitude and our response. Remember Gabor Mate, he says trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you because of what happens to you. So the post-traumatic growth piece there. The second one up is you really talk around this idea of collaboration. And your story is powerful in terms of, it's the Ubuntu, it takes the village to raise and to help a person heal and restore and repair. I know that for myself. I could not get through lockdown by myself. And I think that's the one thing we need to be mindful of, is we need to make sure that we are surrounding ourselves with people that are pulling us towards what can yet be better and more. As we do that, we can then embrace a little bit more curiosity. We don't have to be tunnel vision in terms of I'm only focusing on how bad things are, but we can actually start with those people helping us. We can actually have a greater perspective, a greater peripheral vision. And as you do that, you then start unlocking and unleashing, I call it courage. So it's that sense of, I've got this personal strength. I'm getting through this. And Oscar Chalipsky is in school with me. He's in the same space. And I look at so much happening to incredible people. And that courage that comes through, and it's inspiring many people. So again, kudos and respect in terms of how you also progress. But it also talks to the last one around post-traumatic growth, which is around this idea of, call it spiritual development or wisdom or enlightenment. It's that new way of seeing what can yet be and become. And my sense is that as leaders who are dealers in hope, we need to start beginning to understand more around this, not this negative PTSD, but the positive PTG. And we need to role model that and embrace it and lean into it and engage that more.
Amen. Thank you, Rory. Thank you, Anne, that we could use your story as well. Thank you for everybody who was on the call. Thank you for amazing questions. Dineo, I think part of your answer was in this last part that we just shared. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Rory, thank you so much. I said to you earlier today, I'm going to just learn a ton from your insights and wisdom. And that's exactly what happens. I really just, from my heart to yours, thank you so much for being our guest this evening and for sharing and just being Rory. Really just appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening further. The South Africans continue celebrating. And catch you next year. Our next Leaders in Hope episode will be in February 2024. And we'll keep you all in the loop and let you know when that is and how we're going to be structuring that and what the theme will be. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening further. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers.